how do we make intelligence or AI composable, transferable, almost Lego-like, right? Like that's the analogy that people give in DeFi or crypto. Like how do you make that a building block that other people can build on? There is this global permissionless infrastructure that can govern, that can transact openly, that can determine value, that can show exchange, that can move assets in a permissionless way. Why are we not using this permissionless infrastructure that we have to establish provenance of AI, having communities govern these models, right? Like these are the important questions that motivate us at Alethea, that these are ways and means where we can influence the direction and evolution of these core technologies. So
welcome back to the DeFi Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad from Fourth Revolution Capital. Today, we have a very interesting conversation for you. I'm going to be interviewing Arif Khan, who is the CEO and co-founder of Alethea AI, where he leads a research studio building at the intersection of two groundbreaking technologies, artificial intelligence and blockchain. Their mission is to use these technologies to enable decentralized ownership and democratic governance of AI. If you've not been living under a rock, you're well aware that AI is a hot topic in the mainstream news now. But what's really interesting is, for me, as a crypto native user, I think about AI as a digitally native intelligence. And so part of the reason I wanted to have Arif on is I think of it as another composable building block, as this wide-reaching layer that we can plug into Web3 products. But at the end of the day, what we're going to talk about is a building block that is digitally native intelligence that could potentially then complement digitally native finance and all the other sorts of Web3 use cases. Some background on Arif is I've known of his vision for Alethea, and full disclosure, I've been an active participant in the Alethea protocol since 2021 when DeFi was king, NFTs were on the rise, and the idea of merging AI with Web3 use cases was unheard of. Arif, back in 2021, would have said that Alethea is on a mission to create, share, and monetize synthetic media, which is ultimately created by artificial intelligence. That is still true today, but they've evolved into building applications and other facets of the protocol, which we're going to talk all about here. So, Arif, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
it's great to be here, DeFi Dad, and excited to have this conversation at a very, very interesting time. And forgive me if I sound a little bit exhausted given the weekend we've just had with the banking, near bank run that we nearly experienced in the US, right?
Yeah, so whenever folks listen to this in the future, we are recording on Monday, March 13th, 2023. Last week we had two banks fail, two crypto-related banks. They are, well-known banks, but these were banks that happen to serve a lot of crypto startups. So yeah, there's been quite a shakeup here, and yeah, it's been an exciting time to say the least in the crypto industry. Actually, what had me thinking of Alethea is that, okay, so a part of these bank collapses has been that we live in a world now where we are hyper-connected. And so any news is instantly shared. That news travels very quickly. Whereas back in even 2008, when the great financial crisis happened, that was a time where newspapers still existed. And we were only starting to get to a point where folks were getting their news from, digital newspapers or digital news sources. And so anyways, now that we live in this sort of modern era where I would say news cycles are very reflexive, I think we've sort of seen the impact of that, where news or rumor gets out that a bank might collapse. And then next thing you know, you've got folks lined up outside that bank. And so there's been this fear of more bank collapses. And the way I bring it back to Alethea here is one of the things that we're going to talk about here is that there's a lot of ethical considerations to what Alethea is developing. There's a lot tangential to AI development here. And I've thought a lot about like, what would synthetic media, what sort of role does that play in the future of these sorts of like major events in society? Is there a chance in the future that, well, there's not even a chance that it's a certainty that we will have like news reporters who are AI generated characters. And so we won't just be reading the news and like seeing the influencer who's all over Twitter and other social media quickly making videos to get it up as quickly as they can. I think we're going to see text to video generation with AI characters that, could be powered by something like an Alethea. But also too, you could see this used potentially in a nefarious way where someone's creating AI-based characters to spread false news as well. So this conversation, our goal is to talk about really a question that I don't hear discussed often, which is, what is the difference between Web 2 AI and Web 3 AI? And so that's our goal, is to sort of uncover how do you, Arif, and your team as like leading experts in the world on the intersection of blockchain and AI or crypto and AI, how do you think about that? How do you design products for it? How do you solve real problems in society? So on that note, maybe we should kick off with a little bit more about your background. Do you want to share a little bit about like just who you are, what you worked on before Alethea? And yeah, I'd love to kind of walk through some of the basics of AI for folks that are totally new to artificial intelligence and wondering like why there's so much buzz about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to DeFi that. And obviously, this is a heavy topic sometimes. And the seduction we all have is to think of disastrous scenarios because the world is so complex and continuously stress-inducing, right? Like what we've seen. So we'll try and keep the conversation oriented around where I think the opportunities for humanity are, but also where the opportunities for systems that I think can erode the free will of a human being can insert themselves in. Right? Like I think one of the reasons why I started Alethea almost, it's now almost 4 years, I think, towards the end of 2019. Really back then, the only NFT collection that had gained some traction was Dapper Labs' CryptoKitties, and that had congested the Ethereum blockchain. And here I was saying that back then, synthetic media, now better known as generative media, but both really linguistically talking about the same idea of AI-generated media. So I came up with a thesis that, hey, this AI-generated media assets are going to need a provenance layer, because if you think of AI as an abundance engine, the tremendous creative potential that can be exerted with some of these generative models, you will also need a trust engine, a scarcity engine below it to verify and validate all of this abundance. So to your example earlier about the news content and whether spam or fake news or the next AI-led bank run, right, will occur primarily, can be somewhat stopped if we try and think through how do we provenance what an AI is and what a human is, right? Almost as if there's a proof of humanity or proof of AI, right? And so Twitter does that with the blue check marks, but and that is to validate human identities. We are going to be entering a world where AI identities will also need something like that. But just my interest in this space has been long-standing. I think it's been now 6 or 7 years since I got into crypto and AI. I was the chief marketing officer of SingularityNet before, where they have a robot called Sophia, and I had the chance to really participate in a very revolutionary, I think, idea and company. Right? So somewhat foolishly, I decided just before the pandemic to give Alethea its day and bring that vision to life, only to realize that this idea back then of generative AI and blockchains having provenance for AI assets was too new, too early. right? And people were not able to get it. Only today, the conversation thanks to OpenAI's ChatGPT, or even Alethea AI's character GPT that is now being used quite well in the crypto community because it provides a provenance to the AI. We're seeing people understand the value of AI. What we have not yet seen is the intersection of these two worlds, right? So my primary background has been in technology for my entire career, but primarily I was trained as in philosophy and also in engineering. So I've had a chance to travel quite a bit around the world, and I grew up originally in Singapore, but live between the US and Asia right now.
With Alethea, maybe you could talk a little bit about what first got eyes on Alethea, which is this concept of an intelligent NFT. And then I'd love if you could share a bit more about the character GPT. And again, I think this will help to inform more of this like broader conversation about what is this like new age of Web3 AI. But yeah, anyways, if you can kind of walk us through iNFTs to character GPT.
Yeah. So I think the first prototype, or rather proof of concept, that we launched was the first iNFT known as Alice. Alice was an iNFT sold or auctioned on Sotheby's. And I don't know what our AI overlords may think down the line of the first NFT sold on Sotheby's. But I think it's an important marker in the fusion of these two technologies, because we realized sometime as we were doing the research and development work that these two technologies actually would work really interestingly and well together if we can provenance that intelligence and make it a primitive in the ecosystem. That means, how do we make intelligence or AI composable, transferable, almost Lego-like, right? Like that's the analogy that people give in DeFi or crypto. Like, how do you make that a building block that other people can build on, that can be transferred back and forth, that can be sold, traded, and used within an ecosystem and consumed, right? So Alice was the first iNFT that combined AI and NFTs. It was an NFT that could talk and interact and learn from you. It was the first chatbot-based NFT, and Greg Brockman, the CTO, back then he was the CTO of OpenAI, and now I think he's the chairman and president. But he tweeted out back then that this is the first GPT-3 NFT sold, because it did fetch a very, very interesting price, because it was the first of its kind, right? So it is the fusion of these two technologies. That means an NFT that's not just a static image, right? It's not just a JPEG file. It is a dynamic, evolving asset that has intelligence embedded in it. How is that intelligence embedded? That's covered sort of in the technical blog post, but broadly, the idea of prompt writing and the breakthroughs that this paper written by OpenAI actually had on the broader industry was, I think, language models are few short learners. That means you can just write a small, brief description, the same tools that we're using interacting with ChatGPT or Character GPT today. Write a small description and the AI understands all of it and is able to respond to you from that basis, right? So you can ask the AI philosophical question, or you can ask the AI to create something for you. You're basically prompting or whispering to this AI brain or AI model, right? And that allows the AI to process and understand a little bit of what you are saying, contextualize it within its awareness, and then generate outputs that are reasonable and also almost human-like, right? Or sometimes even superior to humans in certain domains. But whether the AI understands deeply the meaning of what it is saying, that part there has been criticism around some of these language models, but that is part and parcel of the growth and evolution of these models as they become more and more sophisticated. So Alice was the first iNFT sold and was the first proof of concept. We then created the first 100 revenants. So it took us almost about a year of R&D to create Alice, and a year of working with OpenAI. And our team, our technical team, our partnerships team, we looked at and assessed like what is the best way to combine these two technologies, because it hadn't been done before. Too difficult, too technically complex. So what is the best way that you can show provenance on chain? So that was the breakthrough we had. And then it took us about a year to do Alice, and then about 6 months. So you can see the exponential curve start to kick in because technology starts to evolve fairly quickly. Compute with Moore's law, it gets cheaper over time, right? But also the learnings that we were having as a team, as we were building these technologies, we realized that if we can do one, we can do 100. If we can do 100, we can do 10,000 or 100,000 or a million or a billion, right? So Alethea's real vision and mission is that all of these AI characters, all of these AI assets that we create, fundamentally, just like we in the crypto world are somewhat paranoid about self-custody, right? The idea that we should have control of our own financial destiny. I would push the idea a little bit further, even in the domain of AI, that there should be self-custodial AI, AI that you as a user control, participate in, and evolve together with you, not just necessarily one large company that dictates, right? So an AI in every Web3 wallet is actually going to become possible for many different reasons. I mean, right now, anybody who makes that claim may not be making it accurately, but I think it is on the roadmap. But there are two reasons why this becomes really pertinent and important. One is compute costs are dropping tremendously and very quickly over time. So what we can do from a compute standpoint today, we could not do 4 or 5 years ago. Impossible to achieve this level of scale. But the second thing I think that is really interesting, this just happened, and you'll start seeing applications of this, just like DeFi did when we were speaking a little bit about stable diffusion in its early days and like how imaginative and transformative this model would be. We're seeing something similar with a model that was leaked by, I mean, I don't know, I don't think it was leaked, but maybe it was, there was some level of mischief given that it was released on 4chan, right? So model was released on 4chan recently that was the Facebook's large language model called Llama. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but like it's an acronym. But I think the ability for that model, because it uses a specific technique called quantization, which is reducing and making these models really, really efficient. You're going to have a world where these models are so efficient, they can essentially function on your phone. They can function on your laptop. They can function on your edge device. That means the compute requirements no longer matter as aggressively as it did, a long time ago. So you're talking about ownership of models and ownership of this base primitive that is going to become very, very important and pertinent. So I think these two factors combined with the creative possibilities that users and creators like you and me, as we interact with these technologies, we're trying to think about how can we make meaningful output from this? How can we interact with something like this that can allow us to do our jobs better, or that can allow us to be better participants in the Alethea protocol, right? Or better hosts, right? Better summarizers, better thinkers. All of these technologies are going to have a very important self-custodial element if we want to have some agency over how they evolve. Otherwise, the same mistakes that we made with sort of like just offloading the responsibility to large data monopolies to manage this entire equation for us, we're going to struggle and suffer with the same unintended consequences that would have occurred, right? So I've sort of gone into like the principle and sort of philosophy of why we are building this as a composable intelligence unit and why it's ownable as an asset and why these systems and functions that are happening in society, whether it's compute becoming more available, whether it's model quantization, all of these things are going to make it easier for the user, for you and I to actually participate and influence the evolution of AI. Right now, the evolution of AI is largely being controlled by the same people who may be, I'm just putting a crude analogy, the same executive standard of the business person who runs a bank and makes decisions, that same hierarchical structure that produces environments and outcomes like this is going to be controlling AI, right? Because they have bottom lines, they have ideas, they have to have a core focus to launch some things, sometimes irresponsibly as well, right? So these same systems are being replicated in this structure, and if we provide ownership back to the user, we may just have a chance in influencing the direction of this so that it doesn't always go into dystopia, right? So that eternal hopefulness must reign because we're talking about self-custodial AI.
Okay, so one top of mind question for me, thinking about this this AI in a self-custodial nature, the way that a revenant, one of the iNFTs that was created by Alethea, the way that revenants exist, the way that Alice exists, the like flagship first iNFT that was gained a lot of popularity through Alethea, the intelligence that is imbued into those NFTs that you engage with, what is its origin? And is it fair to say, like, could the plug be pulled technically then on that intelligence the way that it exists today? Like, I'm thinking of like Neo in the Matrix, like them ripping the cord out of the back of the neck there. And if Neo is the iNFT or Alice or a Revenant, is it fair to say that at this point, the way that this all exists, that AI is basically it's possible to censor that or to remove access to that, even though you would have ownership still of the iNFT?
You're absolutely 100% correct. The present day AI models largely sit on centralized infrastructure contributed by large tech companies. Anybody who sees anything else is not being fully transparent with you. So what is on-chain as an asset is the NFT, and it provides a lock and key, right? It provides a key to unlock that specific intelligence that today sits on the cloud, right? It sits on centralized servers. But if you go back to the earlier point about what is happening with the efficiency of certain models, like even stable diffusion, I saw a demo recently where Qualcomm phone was able to run stable diffusion on edge, where we are seeing examples of quantization for some models like the Facebook model, where you can now run it on an M2 laptop from MacBook. You're going to start seeing trends where this becomes cheaper, faster, better, and more deployable in decentralized environments where people can spin up their own nodes. So the same thing that happened with Bitcoin mining or Ethereum mining, we're going to have the similar transition where this core constraint of compute can be solved democratically, but we're not there yet. We're not at that level of decentralized infrastructure which can genuinely support efficient delivery of AI services, right? So ChatGPT is wonderful, it's great, but every day Microsoft has to sponsor and subsidize that model to the tune of $3 to $4 million a day, right? So, and that is running on Azure cloud services, and nothing wrong with the centralized model, except if we go back to the earlier idea of the challenges that will occur if we don't have some agency in this. We need to be able to not be intimidated and be able to take control of some of these assets. So the NFT part is the first sort of salvo in providing users with the idea that, hey, this can exist, this does exist, and this can be transferred. So you transfer the NFT, you transfer the intelligence. The intelligence is on this thin layer on the cloud, but that cloud is moving towards decentralization. There are some crypto projects here that are focused only on creating decentralized cloud networks. And I think that there is a thesis there that can be explored, and are building these exact sort of tooling and infrastructure to make that possible. But we're still a bit further away from the efficiency that these large technical giants can provide, right? So it's going to be very difficult for a smaller crypto native project to provide decentralized cloud and compete with the likes of Amazon, right? Because those guys have been doing it for 10, 20 years, solving this very, very technical problem, but it is getting a lot easier.
Okay, so now you have me thinking about there's a risk of this AI colonialism with big tech centrally owning AI resources, basically repeating all of the mistakes of Web 2 that spurred I think the creation of Bitcoin and eventually Ethereum and all of what we collectively know as Web 3. And so there's this concept that we all buy into, that we should provide an alternative where you have decentralized owned resources. In my world, it's DeFi. In our shared world here, we're talking about AI. But I'm a little worried that in an effort to compete with big tech, that we're going to see basically a Web3 ownership around AI that is not ready to, again, take on the immense responsibilities. If you have let's say a bunch of token holders that have governance over an AI, you need folks who are really tuned in, who are very careful about the decisions that they make. I think there's good examples in crypto already. I think there's good examples in DeFi of communities that have been very thoughtful, but I just recognize governance of such protocols to own a broad-reaching AI layer that can be integrated with Web3 use cases. It still carries a lot of risk, and there is some advantage in centrally controlled systems, but then I think we also recognize that something like an OpenAI looks and feels like all of the mistakes that were made in Web 2. That we're basically going to relive the mistakes of Web 2, big tech owning everything. So my question for you is, I guess, how do you wrestle with these incredibly difficult questions as you're working at the intersection of all of this? We want, in the same way that DeFi is permissionless, in the same way that it grants you an alternative where you're 100% in control if you're using real DeFi, not the fake DeFi, not the stuff that pretends to be DeFi but is actually centralized finance. So I want that sort of value to be brought forth to the community with AI, but how do you think about all this? How do you wrestle with that?
Yeah, these are, I think, really broad philosophical questions that are really important. So I'll give you frameworks of how we think about it, but not many answers, because the question is being answered and being lived out as we speak, just like the story of DeFi is being answered today, right? It's not just an experiment. One can make the argument that having democratic systems is an end in and of itself, regardless of how terrible the outcomes are. Because the challenge with an existing system that reduces human free will, reduces the ability for people to participate and govern, and centralizes all of that, we are seeing the risks of that play out, right? We are cautious of it. That's why in the American democratic tradition, the president has limited powers because they've seen the harms of tyranny, right? They've seen the harms of monarchy and centralization back then when they were subject to the British Empire. So there is this thesis, this core thesis that power, if centralized, is harmful. And that seems to have resonated and echoed across the past 300-400 years. We don't know whether that's going to be a core theme in the next 300 to 400 years, right? But one thing that we need to think about is, why even emphasize democratic governance or community-owned participation? This is not a panacea. You don't solve the problem of the moral weight of the world. But what you do is you create systems whereby the individual, you and I, start to think a little bit more about our free will and agency, and we start to use that to ask questions, and we start to interact with the technology in a way where we are empowered to interact with it, as opposed to the sort of structure the sort of feudal structure, right? You kick up your rent and your fees to me, and shut up because I'm letting you live, otherwise I'll raid your village, right? So we are living in this sort of dynamic right now where we are seeing, and OpenAI, for all of the criticism it receives, it has, asked for greater regulation, greater oversight of AI. It has made these positions fairly public, and that's a great thing. But fundamentally and structurally, the idea of people being able to participate and govern the models, govern the inputs that go into this model, own these models and own the economic incentives that they decide to create for these models. These are rules you can create with cryptographic incentives that fit very well into a digitally native intelligence layer, right? So you can, as the AIs become more intelligent, they will negotiate their own rules with the system as well. They will negotiate their own rules with human beings. Do you want these systems to negotiate their rules in the closed, empty corridors of a high corporate office tower, in a boardroom somewhere with 6 men, right? Or do you want these discussions to happen a little bit out in the open, where there is an understanding of the parameters of harm? There is also education. There is inoculation. Hey, these are some dangers that are possible. And really guide people along that journey. It's going to be a bit messier. There are going to be less efficiencies when you go down this path, which is also one of the reasons why we are on a path to progressive decentralization, where we don't say that we are perfectly and fully decentralized, although the protocol is live and is being perfected. We think that the ability for people, normal everyday people, to participate and interact and own that relationship is very, very important. And I'll give you one example of this that happened recently when an application called Replica, where people, interacted with the chatbot, and the pitch that Replica had was, you can fall in love with the chatbot, right? Like, it was a digital companion to you. And the chatbot, I think, maybe based on the news reports, I don't know how aggressively accurate this is, but started to go a little bit haywire and went down it was an NSFW chatbot for people, but it started to do that for users who were kids. Like, I think there was some sort of tripwire that it hit. And so Replica, the company, decides to switch off access to the chatbot. And that chatbot is still accessible, but it will never ever communicate, or it does not communicate anymore with you in the way that it used to, with the romantic, flirtatious messages. So all of that relationship you built with this AI, wiped off, gone, cleaned out. Just exactly almost a replica of the movie Her, right? And so, the difference between, the scenario Her, where in the movie Her, where Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with the voice of Scarlett Johansson. It's a great movie, and I encourage your audience to watch it because it humanizes the conflict that occurs. Is that in that movie, Scarlett Johansson's AI, that voice, is owned by essentially a large, almost Google-like company, right? That decided to upgrade its OS, and suddenly it's no longer in Phoenix's life. But in our case, what we are proposing is, hey, there is this global permissionless infrastructure that can govern, that can transact openly, that can determine value, that can show exchange, that can move assets in a permissionless way. Why are we not using this scarcity engine, this permissionless infrastructure that we have, to establish provenance of AI, showcasing creators who contributed data sets to a specific AI and incentivizing them with the right output, having communities govern these models, right? These are the important questions that motivate us at Alethea, that these are ways and means where we can influence the direction and evolution of these core technologies. So I'd say the frameworks that we need to emphasize are one of free will. That means what brings human beings free will and agency in participating, because we lose our free will every day, DeFi Dad. I'm sorry for sounding moralistic, but it's the same thing of dopamine sort of hacking, right? We're already in many ways addicted, and there's a lot of our free will muscle that goes and that is hijacked, right? And if you think that the existing mechanisms for taking our attention are bad, wait till you see an AI that is hyper-optimized to deliver ads to you that are completely personalized to you, and it hooks you on your favorite shows and shows you in your favorite shows and makes you participate in all of these hallucinations that reduce your participatory agency in society, right? So we have to really think about the concept of free will and human agency. Any system, in our opinion, Alethea, that emphasizes and creates environments where free will can be emphasized and grown, those are powerful systems. And that's why, Web3 and crypto, that there is not just that libertarian anarchist streak, but it is actually a very human streak. So self-custodial AI is going to become very, very critical. People don't realize it yet, but they will in maybe 3 or 5 years. But hopefully before then, it's not too late, right?
I like what you're saying about enhancing free will. That I think that's clearly one of the like the guardrails here for what's potentially right versus wrong, or what's going to lead to
free will. DeFi Dad is also what distinguishes us critically from AI. It is a primary evolutionary distinction between us and the machines. Right, so we have this ability to create meaning. We have this ability to generate will and power. And sorry to interrupt, but just like I interrupted you with free will, an AI might have waited for you to articulate your full question and then give a robotic response. But a human might decide to intervene and create that moment or find a space of conversation. Right? So the spontaneity, that awareness, that still does not exist. So free will is not just designed for systems; it is innately what distinguishes us from our machine companions. And I'm not putting it as us versus them. I'm just saying that there is a foundational difference in the way we are created versus our creations are created, right?
With over 60,000 subscribers and 450 integrations, Push Protocol, the leader in Web3 communications, just launched Push Group Chat. While Push Chat already enables secure and private wallet-to-wallet messaging between any wallet addresses, the new Push Group Chat allows anyone to permissionlessly create groups, share files, and collaborate with communities natively on Web3. Try it now at app.push.org. I think whether it's in my lifetime or beyond, I would imagine that this leads to, eventually leads to an artificial intelligence that has free will as well, but can somehow coexist with humans. And then what's crazy about that is when you think about one of the limitations, as I understand it, is robotics. Robotics, if you look at I think it's Boston Dynamics, if you look at their robots, you go, whoa, but it's far behind the advancements made in AI. So all I'm trying to say is eventually when robotics catches up, and then you can imbue a physical thing, a robot, with an AI, which is the intelligence, or what I would say ultimately is this digital soul, you have all sorts of crazy things to come. I have no doubt that there will be relationships, partnerships between what is AI plus robot with human beings, and there's all sorts of parlor tricks to that to consider at the start of it. I'm sure there will be lots will be stood up by the adult industry, I'm sure, in terms of merging those use cases, and you can read between the lines what I mean there. But I'm saying there will be meaningful, real relationships and partnerships, which is just wild. Arif, how do you think about the elements of Web3 then that AI can best benefit from? I guess I could just blanketly say tokenization, that allows for ownership, coordination among a community of like-minded folks. But what has really stood out for you in terms of Web3 elements, use cases, protocols that ultimately can benefit the continued development of AI?
Yeah, I think one thing that is powerful about the Web3 ethos at the core of it is transparency and openness, right? So everything is on chain, the ledger is on chain. Oftentimes these AI models are black boxes and you don't know what has been fed in, what is the output, right? You can see the output, but you don't know what has gone into the models. To some degree, there's some research areas there that are quite interesting, but I'd say if you think about key things that Web3 has enabled across the experiments that we've seen over the past, has it been a decade that we have seen the rise of DeFi? It has taken us almost, since the Bitcoin white paper until now. Only now we are starting to see evolutions of protocol and governance happening openly, a completely permissionless exchange like Uniswap a couple of years ago. an ecosystem like Ethereum emerging and having decentralized applications built on top of it. I think for us, like the main way to think about it is the governance aspect of AI is going to become important. The permissionless nature of it, to be able to transact freely and to be able to create freely, is going to become critical. So that means having an open permissionless substrate to transact. But it's also about the opportunity to have control and permission so that nobody can switch it off on you, right? So like if you are an owner in the network, you are entitled to participate in the network. You are part of the network's growth. You contributed to the network, right? And so just like you stake your ETH today in a network and that helps that specific ecosystem, people would be able to put their AI's labor to good use within a specific network to do specific tasks, right? So Web3 has Web3 AI versus Web2 AI. At the core of it, all of this comes down to one idea, which is property rights. Does the property right for that specific AI go back to the individual, or does it go to a large sort of blanket corporation that can control it, right? And so if you have these property rights baked into Web3 and you have that agency and ownership, you then have some free will again to participate and decide how the network evolves, right? And that is where the human story must continue, coordinated action designed by human beings to be able to determine how this technology evolves, not the other way around, right? And so these ecosystems and Web3 philosophies are not just ideas, but they are enacted on-chain, immutable, irreversible, and that provides security as we deal with an extremely complex system. Because the AI we see today, DeFi, that is the analogy I'd give to your users is to the community is what we see with ChatGPT is great. Don't get me wrong, but the analogy I would give is like what we see with consumer-oriented drones versus what we see with institutionally backed defense predator drones, right? Like there is a core distinct difference in capacity, power, ability, speed, accuracy. You will never find, and I don't think this will ever happen, you will never find a predator drone becoming available to the consumer mass market, right? Because then it will cost too many. There's just regulation and all that. Similarly, you need to think a little bit about the AI models we're seeing today. These are consumer products that are shipping to market. They are less powerful. They are consumerized. We still don't have the full story of what actually is possible. I mean, we are seeing research from our side and some of the work that we're doing with Alethea and Character GPT. We haven't released some of these tools yet because we haven't set out the governance frameworks for some of these tools, right? So we're at the stage where the first snapshot vote has occurred on which character should we ban. We've put out our constitution, right? And so we're starting this digital ecosystem that determines how this protocol and synthetic intelligence will evolve. But to release tools that can rapidly take your voice and face and put out a podcast immediately and say, buy this token or sell this token. Like these are tools that need to be governed more democratically. So that's the power of AI, and I think Web3 will provide that property rights infrastructure, and that is what the AI protocol does today that Alethea is building.
Yeah, I am always struck by a lot of the guiding principles for you. They sound like things that you would have heard early Bitcoiners talk about. It sounds a lot like what you would hear now at an Ethereum conference or really just any sort of like, long-term thinker mindset in the crypto community. And that's because it, as you pointed out, it all goes back to property rights.
It goes back to colonialism. It goes back, like if you look at my own story, like I come from a people who were colonized by the British. The fact that I can speak English with you is the result of a language model that was installed in my great grandfather, right? When he was taken from his small village in Punjab by the British, not too dissimilar from the American experience, or like anywhere where there has been a cultural power that has the ability to control trade routes and resources. All of these abilities that we take for granted today, people had monopolies, and from that monopoly, they solved for their own needs that were oriented around scarcity. Whether it was spice, whether it was tea, whatever they wanted, slave labor would provide, right? And so the history of exploitation is extremely real, extremely, extremely real. The fact that I can have this conversation with you today in English, that we can speak a common lingua franca, is the result of many, many years of decisions that can be provenanced in our history as a species, right? And the point now is like, and the reason why I don't want to say I sound like an early Bitcoiner or an Ethereum, is just if you study history, like what seems to regularly repeat DeFi Dad is that we have these exponential technologies, and we have a privileged few that have access to these exponential technologies, and they exploit these technologies for a specific class or subset of people. And that exploitation results in several different degrees of suffering for the rest of us humans, right? And so the question right now is whether the exploiters in the future would be AIs, would be humans in cahoots with AI, would be a certain specific elite. Fundamentally, what is really powerful about Web3, DeFi Dad, and this is one of the reasons why we connected and why I appreciated your participation in the protocol, is the egalitarian nature of it. That it can provide the normal man or normal person a shot, right? Like that has been sort of taken away in an environment of hyperinflation, in an environment of tremendous confiscation of opportunities, right? So that's the context we live in today. And if we don't get this equation right, or if we don't start even asking the questions and going back to individuals, what matters to you and me, how can we make our families better, how can we make our lives better, then community and society, then we sort of like give up we give up in the battlefield of ideas, and we give up in the battlefield of deciding this agency. What people do is they get intimidated by, they think like it's beyond them. It's never beyond them. And that's the thing about crypto. Like when you onboard people through your shows, like you are really showing like this is, okay, the UX kind of sucks a little bit, but we are getting there in terms of like, you were able to transfer this asset from this place to this place without an intermediary. And for most people, like it almost takes a while for them to understand, like, is that important, But they only realize it in moments like what we just saw, right? Like with the banks over the weekend. So I'll get off my soapbox right now, but I just wanted to give that context. That principle of like suffering, human suffering is a universal constant. And it is usually the people who have access to privileged information or access to technologies that can exploit other people. And now we are at this point where you have an exponential technology that can be exploited, but by who? And for what end? And to what to what purpose? Predator drone strikes on other people? Okay, maybe that's for national defense. Great. But like if you're talking about putting the middle class out of jobs and creating systemic societal shifts that we've seen in Middle America already, that have harmed and killed entire like cities that were once proud steel mills, like you're talking about mass societal level change. And I think there's a level of gross irresponsibility if we just leave this to the elites, right?
The idea that like you have a vote and you have a say and it counts for something, like no matter how teeny tiny it feels, it matters. And that's what you're ultimately able to do when you tokenize resources, protocols, in this case, like an AI. So yeah, I think you make a really meaningful point here about the history of exploitation, the fact that like the incentives are there for always a very like powerful few to take advantage. And what are we supposed to do ultimately? Just depend on the benevolence of those who will have access to AI to allow us to have this like super consumer friendly, easy to use sort of AI, while meanwhile the AI could be weaponized against the public it could be weaponized, as in fact, it already is. I mean, there's zero question in my mind that there is, AI resources, obviously, that are going to be used by governments, and whether that's used to battle between governments versus its own people just depends on what country you're looking at. But I think what I mean to say here is this is why we lean towards tokenization as being a really powerful transferable value from Web3 to use with AI, and to allow us to potentially have, I think, a more promising future with everyone having access to these really powerful AI resources that could make our lives, potentially better.
Yeah, and then just remember, DeFi, that the idea here today is, yes, the network and the rules are being determined, and we are solving for some level of governance and incentives, right? Show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome, right? You're trying to create the right incentives and mechanisms so these models can perhaps be governed. These models today are built on centralized infrastructure, but we are seeing shifts where it's going to become easier to move in the direction of decentralization. And so there are opportunities here that didn't exist 5 years ago just because the technology is evolving so quickly. And that's also the exciting part. Like any technology that comes to market, if we can create the right incentives, we can actually determine the right outcomes to some extent for the network and its growth, right? And so presently the incentives are extremely skewed towards facilitating one specific core output, and that is the output that the same problem that Facebook or Meta had, right? Which was, we organize our entire resources and might for the shareholders' value, right? And so if democracy be damned, right, in the process, right? So it's like how do you balance the needs of businesses, governments, and like what society wants? And I think the challenge with any new exponential technology is where how fast the market is ahead of regulators and partners and different members of society, and how difficult it is going to be for normal people to catch up, because let's face it, I mean, not all of us are going to be mathematical geniuses or born with the IQ of a savant, right? But that doesn't exclude us from in any way being part of the conversation and shaping it. We have every right and the free will and the soul, a real soul, not a digital soul, not a pod or an intelligence pod. As human beings, we have the right to participate in the way that all of this plays out. So,
no, that totally resonates. Let's start to wrap up the conversation by bringing all of the, I think, the thoughts and philosophy and like just really difficult conversations to wrestle with here to the reality of use cases that are being designed through Alethea. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe we should start with Character GPT and how that can be used by builders, Web3 builders, anyone who wants to build for AI use cases. But I'd also like to just talk also about some of the pie in the sky ideas that are in development through Alethea that we're optimistic will be possible, especially with community-owned AI resources in the future.
No, absolutely. So I think so Alethea is a protocol. There's an AI. So Alethea is building an AI protocol, right? And this AI protocol is decentralized. The smart contracts are live. They're audited. You can go and inspect it and have a look at it and see when an NFT has an AI component to it. How does it come to life? We've just launched our second dApp in the ecosystem, which now has gotten about 2 million plus visits since we launched it, and about 200,000 plus people who have interacted or created a character. Almost about 50,000 plus Polygon wallets that were created. So what we've launched is basically an application of our research that went into Alice, into the Revenants. This was all community trained as well, and we rewarded our community for this data. We did a campaign called the Intelligence Training Event, so where the community spoke with our characters and debated the characters. All of those data sets fed into the model that you see today with Character GPT, and we rewarded our community for participating in the labor to grow the protocol and to grow the intelligence in the Alethea ecosystem, right? So Character GPT is a multimodal system that allows you to create text to character. So you type any text in and you'll get a character out. In your case, DeFi Dad, you have a digital twin there with a gold check mark, I believe, or a blue check mark. That is your one of one that cannot be sold, bought. I mean, you can transfer it. Well, technically, you can sell it. We have not placed any controls around it, but it's one of one in the sense that you have your synthetic AI generated voice. You have your AI generated personality that has been taken from your tweets, from your YouTube lectures, from your conversations, and people can now go and interact with you to learn about DeFi. Now, it may not be that deep an interaction like you would have with ChatGPT, but that language model is continuously improving. It may be slower than what you see with like a centralized cloud provider, but it is foundationally community driven, right? So that's the core difference. So in your case, your digital twin is there. People soon will be able to create their own digital twins. Technology we haven't released yet because we want the right governance frameworks around this to ensure that face and voice piracy doesn't happen at scale, right? And we create the right incentives to take down harmful characters that can harm the fabric of our society, right? So we want to create the right protocol level and governance incentives to create the right network that actually moves humanity forward and doesn't take us back, right? And so Character GPT is one of the intelligence AI engines. We will have more AI engines added. Today, these AI engines are somewhat centralized, but the assets created, the NFTs, they can be bought, sold, and transacted, and we don't switch off the AI engine unless there is a vote on the protocol as to how these AI engines should be switched on or off. So you have permissionless access to the AI engine. We're not going to switch it off, and we are very mindful about how community interacts with these AI engines. So what is likely to happen as we open up the protocol further is people are going to develop dApps, and that is a core goal. They're going to develop their own characters. They're going to develop their own models. They're going to be able to develop their own essentially intelligent assets. This could be art pieces, music, a YouTube influencer that's an AI character, a newscaster that's an AI character. There's a whole host of horizontal applications, dApps also that could be copywriting dApps, dApps that could be art-oriented, like Canva-like dApps, right? So we want to incentivize our community to be able to create these dApps that then train the AI models underneath it, but also utilize the native utility token within the entire ecosystem so that the more users come into the network, the smarter the AI engine becomes, but the protocol also grows in terms of its network effects, right? So there is a really good slide that I've highlighted, sort of the network effects that occur when you combine on-chain activity with off-chain intelligence, how those two drivers actually work in the best way possible. And when you get users in to participate and use those networks correctly and thoughtfully. So today, if you go to ChatGPT and use OpenAI, you don't get any reward. You are training the AI engine. You are giving them feedback, whether you log on, log off, how long you spend, how engaged you are. All of this is data, right? All of this is relevance. But you are just at the end of the day in this system and a consumer, right? You are not a participant in the network that OpenAI is creating. By no means are you deriving any value from that equation other than consuming. And the power of consumption, don't get me wrong, is great. Like that's what the middle class, the entire economy of a gigantic country, China, was built on the purchasing power of the American consumer, right? Like the impact of consumerism is certainly significant, but it also prevents, again, if we go back to the earlier point, free will and agency, right? So if you become a creator in the ecosystem, if you become a network participant, and you're not just there for consumption, you're there because you are understanding how the AI is working, you're governing it, you're participating in the flows of intelligence, you're bringing creators on board, you're launching dApps. Now, that's sort of the goal of the protocol as it begins to scale now that it's in season 2. as we get to season 3, every cycle we are taking those data sets that are generated by the community and improving our AI engines, but also making sure that our community of token holders can govern the network, can vote on the constitution, can decide how all of this evolves. So it is a little bit of a slower approach, but we feel that we need to move in step with our community to get to a destination that we don't necessarily know fully exactly how all of this will exponentially evolve. But we know that at the end of the day, if we create the right tools, people would be able to democratically determine how all of this goes.
So if I were to summarize this discussion, it feels like the example you used with her is really enlightening, because I think the state of the world today is we have tooling like Alethea that is building for applications kind of like the her that Joaquin Phoenix interacts with in that movie Her. Like that's kind of the vision for us here with Alethea. We're building like these really engaging use cases and applications to bring to life. But the missing piece that is really important to our near-term and long-term future is, if the AI that powers these sorts of engagements or intelligent NFTs, if that AI is centrally controlled and owned, then you have an outcome, which, not to spoil the movie, you should watch the movie, but you'll get an outcome kind of similar to what the movie shows there, where you don't ultimately own that relationship. You don't own the access to the AI the way that I own my ETH in a cold storage wallet. Like that is 100% mine based on a private key that I own. So
if I were to butcher the movie Her and do a Web3 version of it, it would be called self-custodial Her. Right? So I don't know what that just butchers anything, but or maybe just put an Ethereum wallet, right, and put the AI in there. But I think, like, at the end of the day, there is a really beautiful synergy between, to what you've just said, like, there is a beautiful synergy between the generative abundance that AI is going to create.
Yeah.
But also the scarcity, trust, and provenance that blockchains provide. And these two go really well in almost a yin-yang-like fashion. And we need to be able to allow users to determine how the generative part evolves by having some level of provenance and ownership, some, chain of custody, right? So that there is this ability to have that free will. So at the end of the day, if you ask me whether Joaquin Phoenix would it be a good outcome if the centralized entity did not switch off Her and he had to move on? I understand that that's one outcome, but it might have been interesting, and generative AI might be able to create a movie ending called an alternate ending, right? Where Joaquin Phoenix actually owns the asset in an NFT Web3 wallet, and then decides one day that maybe this is, and the story just evolves based on his personal desires, not the choices of someone else determining how the relationship should go, based on his choices. And then that's sort of like a pro-human approach to the solution. Not the best outcome, but an interesting one to explore nonetheless.
I think with some of the use cases we've dreamed up with Alethea, like, I could see in the future a Hollywood actor like Joaquin Phoenix, his family would own like an AI version of him, a synthetic media version of him that would continue to be used and have to be provable in terms of like the property rights around that in future media. So you suddenly have, we talked in the early days, I remember we talked a lot about like bringing really famous musicians back to life through synthetic media. We've seen this through like holograms at concerts, and that's cool and all, but I think it's like really exciting to consider, what's possible when you have a digitally scarce, provably ownable version of these sorts of like famous iconic entities. And so, yeah, there's just an endless amount of like possibilities, which I thought were decades away. But given the advancements of what we've seen with like text to image, and now we're going to soon see text to video go, or we're going to start to see text to video become very accessible. I just can't imagine like how near term all these other developments are.
Yeah, to use Joaquin Phoenix's example, just what you just said makes a lot of sense. Plus also add in the fact that there will be a ton of fake Joaquin Phoenix's AIs running around, right? And so like, how do you determine which one is real? Again, provenance, again, scarcity, again, trust, again, custody, chain of history, right? All of these are Web3 native, powerful technologies that were gifted to us by Satoshi's white paper and then brought forward and applications understood and built around it and evolved over the work of Vitalik through Ethereum, right? So there's just a necessity for us to understand how do we digitally represent trust. We have solved that part of it because now we can transact, but how do we now digitally represent intelligence as a composable asset, as an intelligence Lego in the entire ecosystem? And that's really Alethea, what Alethea is solving. So I'm excited to bring this to our community, and our community has been educating us, which has also been really fascinating whenever they talk to a character, and we're understanding as well like why this is important, why it was worth it for us to build this during the pandemic when it was so difficult to get like a 10K angel check, right? Like which is why I'm always grateful to our early supporters like you, DeFi Dad, who saw the vision, could see that there was some inklings of a technical infrastructure that made sense, but now are seeing like the network actually start to take the right baby steps to grow in the direction of decentralization.
Yeah, this is all about AI as a public good. So if you believe in a future where AI is a public good, highly recommend you go to alethea.ai to learn more about the Alethea protocol. And then Arif, if folks want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, where should they do that?
Yeah, I am going to become increasingly irrelevant because I think like what Satoshi has done is shown, and also like all of this, I was reading a very interesting thesis, or I just saw a clip just before I came on, which was the thesis of a venture capitalist after seeing the SBF collapse and all of these problems, that he was short human ego, short narcissism, and long on technology, long on potential, long on... I think like that's what Satoshi has taught us to large... I mean, I'm not in any way a Satoshi or thinking like him, but to a large degree, like that network has developed without that pervasive Web2 centralized narcissistic CEO that sits at the center and dictates the rules of the game, right? I think like the cooler, it would get increasingly cooler and more powerful as the network starts to emerge, and we have participation from more and more community members. So that being said, they're welcome to reach out to me at Twitter, on Twitter at ARKHAN, but who knows, it might be an AI that replies, right? So hopefully...
That's right. Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, folks then should follow Alethea on Twitter at real_Alethea. And then you can go to alethea.ai to actually check out Character GPT and all the other innovations by Alethea. And then I would also encourage folks to hop on the Discord. It's discord.gg/AletheaAI. You'll learn a lot there just because there's a very engaged community. This merging of AI and crypto it makes complete sense. You're taking, again, a digitally native intelligence and you're merging it with what started as digitally native money, but now has grown into this like digitally native finance system with all sorts of other new digitally scarce use cases that we collectively call Web3. So, this is the future. And honestly, we didn't even dive in today about all the different ideas around the metaverse, which is a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, thinking about just a digital universe that provides for a better life. And I think that AI, the way that the internet was so important to accelerating social mobility for so many folks over the last several decades, it's very important that AI is accessible to all, except I think we're trying to learn from the mistakes we made with the internet and how sort of gated and siloed some of that ownership is, and like, can we do it better with some of these Web3 elements like tokenization? But Arif, anything else to share before we go?
No, thank you, DeFi Dad, for always being a early supporter and friend to the protocol, and also guiding us on the pitfalls that occur in Web3. It is not as powerful as it is as the technology is. There are so many tripwires that exist, and you've been a key supporter and partner of the protocol, and it's been wonderful to have you on this journey with us as we continue to grow and then scale and allow human beings to have a fighting chance, right?
Absolutely. Well, and thanks everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe at the DeFi Podcast with DeFi Dad on your favorite podcast player. You can also find links to the show on YouTube and blog posts and so on if you go to defidad.com. So thanks everyone.